All right. Hey, everybody. Let's make sure we're all good here. Yes. Hi. Welcome to a special bonus live stream that I'm doing this week. Tony, I've got a lot of things to say, and I didn't really put an outline or script together. I'm just kind of flying by the seat of my pants. First, before we get into anything, I wanted to thank a couple of supporters who sent in a couple super chats before the show even started. Let's go ahead and flip over to where we can see the comments as well as they come in as we get started here. Unfortunately, you guys can't see the comments that post before the live stream starts. But excellent. Good. We are looking good. Yeah, best wishes from Chile, Canada. Chile, Colorado as well. I think a lot of North America right now is experiencing a bit of that Arctic blast that we are having. So I'm kind of chilling here at home today. I've got two screens that I'll be going back and forth on as we're going. And what we're going to do today... okay, anyway, so thank you very much for those super chats, guys. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about an interview that Tony Ortega posted on his Underground Bunker Substack. It was a two-part interview, and I was inspired to do this show because reading through it was really, really quite something. The interview was with a Scientologist, an active right now practicing Scientologist, that a nameless, anonymous, very enterprising high schooler apparently went and recorded and did so legally. And Tony posted it. And it was, I put it all together. It's 20 pages of transcript. And what I did the other day is I went through and I highlighted various things in it that I wanted to discuss. I'm not going to sit here and read all 20 pages to you. And it's not a recorded interview, so I couldn't play it for you and respond that way. But I thought, well, I took the transcript, I highlighted certain parts, and I thought, let's go ahead and go through that. And being the person that I am and approaching the stuff the way that I do, I thought I'd try to start the show with a little bit of education and intelligence to try to put off some view that I know what I'm talking about here. Specifically, one of the things I used 4 different categories in my highlighting. And I thought you guys might appreciate this. And the first one is actually the most interesting part of this and the ones I found the most of in terms of when I was doing my highlighting. The first thing I went through was I was looking for all of the really objectively false, just totally wrong claims that the Scientologist was making to this high schooler interviewer who was asking her very good questions. He was asking her questions, as you'll see, right out of Dianetics and out of some of the criticism that we have laid at Scientology. He went and asked her about some of this stuff. And the answers that he got were not only there were certainly some objectively false things that were in there. But one of the things that really came up and I thought would be really useful or interesting to highlight today were all of the points of what we call motivated reasoning. And I wanted to kind of go over that because it's a major part of how all of us get through life, if we're really being honest, is we reason things out. We all champion and talk about and love the fact that we are rational creatures who engage in rational thinking. And it's true, we are, and we do. But we can also reason out things to make things make sense to us that don't really make sense, that are not really true. Surprise, right? We can all do this. It's sort of this feature of our brains and our frontal lobes or whatever, wherever the rational thinking is done. We can reason through all kinds of things that are completely nonsensical. And why would we do that? Because we're motivated to. Because we want to or we need to. Because of our emotions, our feelings, our things, our desires. our goals, what influences us, what influences our thinking, the world we want to see, the world we need to see. And that's in a cult situation where you have these really blatantly false ideas and where you just look at it and you just go, how could somebody possibly believe that stuff? Well, that's what this interview gives a little bit of insight into. And personally, reading through the interview, which I've done numerous times now, I couldn't help. I was just struck by how everything that this Scientologist was saying was exactly what I would have said to any of you 10, 15, 20 years ago if you had asked me those same questions. Almost word for word. It was quite interesting. It was quite interesting and a little bit of a trip down memory lane to see that. And yes, thank you guys for noticing. I did do this at noon today at my time, so that I would be EU friendly as well, because I don't want to forget you guys over there either. Okay, yeah, you guys have got some awesome comments here. Now, I will not be necessarily looking for or taking questions during this, so feel free to comment away. And certainly, of course, feel free to super chat away, but I'm not going to really be paying a lot of attention to that so much as I'll be trying to get through what we're going to be going through today. So first, on the motivated reasoning thing, I wanted to give you the full official definition of it, because it's going to come up a lot in this. Okay, motivated reasoning is the phenomenon in cognitive science. In other words, it's in psychology, in which emotional biases lead to justifications or decisions based on their desirability rather than an accurate reflection of the evidence. It is the tendency to find arguments in favor of conclusions we want to believe to be stronger than arguments for conclusions we do not want to believe. Okay. And, to this day, for example, is one of the examples given here. And I'm just reading that off the Wikipedia page. One of the examples to this day is that people will continue to persist in the idea that former President Obama was born in Kenya and is Kenyan and is not American. This is motivated reasoning, right? The facts are clear. The evidence is right there in front of you for anybody who wants to look. But, some people just, nope. It's got to be this way because I want it to be this way. And that's motivated reasoning. And we're going to see, like I said, examples of that. So I guess we should just go ahead and get right into it. All right, cool. Oh my God, 6 a.m. in Sydney, Australia. Wow. Well, thank you, Robot, for tuning in and sharing. Okay, so let's just go ahead and get to it. Like I said, I'm not going to necessarily read through all of this. The categories that I highlighted that I will be talking about today is obviously motivated reasoning. There's also points where she makes subjective statements, things that she just thinks, but she states them as though they're fact. Very related, but kind of a little bit different, and you'll see when we go through what I'm talking about. So there's a lot of subjective things that she says as a Scientologist, that just thoughts that she has or feelings she has, and she makes it out as though it's an objective fact or truth when it's not. There is also objectively false statements. And there's actually really interesting because there's only a few, but they're kind of important. And then finally, the last category that came up as I was going through it was just wow statements. Just like I read it and I just went, wow, really? You said that? And some of them were criticism, mostly because she was being a little critical or a little bit about some aspects of Scientology. And I thought, well, it's good to highlight that for you guys because, Scientologists can get away with that and do kind of think certain things in Scientology are better than others. And maybe they agree with this and maybe they don't agree with that so much. That comes up. That happens all the time. Not every single Scientologist at all is marching in lockstep with every single other Scientologist. And this becomes really apparent in the X community where people can talk with their kind of let their hair down and really get into what they thought and how they interpreted it. Because in Scientology, you're not supposed to be running around talking to other Scientologists about what you think Hubbard meant. I mean, you can share wins, and that tends to be how that is talked about, but you don't get into, or you're not supposed to get into, you know, deep arguments or disagreements or conflicts of opinion about, well, Hubbard said this and I think it means this. Oh yeah, well, I think it means this. That kind of thing is discouraged heavily, and the mechanism that Hubbard used to shut that down and keep Scientologists from talking about this kind of thing with each other is he called it verbal tech. This might be a term you may have heard if you've been following Scientology or Scientology lingo, is this concept of verbal tech. And that is where you are not supposed to be explaining things or talking about things verbally. It's all in writing from L. Ron Hubbard in the transcripts and in the books. And that's the Scientology, and that's the only Scientology. And you read it and you look up the words you don't understand and you clear it all up so that you get the one exact thing L. Ron Hubbard meant. As if it was that easy, and as if L. Ron Hubbard wasn't speaking in, doubles and duplicity all the time. But that's the idea, right? Okay, so some of these statements as we go through, just a couple, are like, oh, wow. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I didn't take a bunch of screenshots. I thought, well, this was an interview. I'll just read you some of the relevant sections and then give you what my thoughts or some of my commentary on it might be. And I thought, I threw this out there and thought maybe people might be interested, and apparently they are. So let's go ahead and do this. First point on the first page, and like I said, there's 20 pages of this. I'm really not sure how long the show's going to go today. Probably a little while. So let's see what happens. So the first question Tony gave them the names Sally and Carl. So Carl is the high schooler and Sally is the Scientologist. Okay, so this is Sally the Scientologist speaking. So Carl asks, do you get sick? Good question, because Scientology, of course, has many claims right out of Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health, that clears don't get sick. And that's a definitive statement that Hubbard makes. Well, he says, do you get sick? And she says, do I get sick? Yeah, sometimes. Not like I used to, but even he says you pour a bunch of bacteria down a clear's throat and they're going to get sick. So yes, sometimes I do. And that, my friends, is the very first point of motivated reasoning. Because here is a fact stated in Dianetics and stated over and over again in Scientology that people only get sick if they are PTS. That's what makes them susceptible to being sick. And we've talked about PTS conditions and being connected to suppressive elements in your life, and that's what that's supposed to mean. But Hubbard's statements earlier on in this were very, very clear that clears, people who rise to the level of clear in Scientology. It's a state that you're supposed to attain, and there's all kinds of talk about clear in here. And she is clear. In fact, the Sally is auditing on the OT7 level. She's right up at the top of the bridge. And so she is someone who has been in Scientology since I think she said since the 1970s. This is a veteran, old school, hardcore Scientologist talking here, not some noob. So she says, yeah, I do get sick sometimes. At least she's honest about it. But notice the motivated reasoning. Even Hubbard says you can get sick if you pour a bunch of bacteria down a clear's throat. Well, I don't know anybody who was holding her down and pouring bacteria down her throat, but she has to, again, make it make sense, right? Well, I'm not supposed to get sick ever. I'm supposed to be this wonderful, clear person. And somebody asked, how do you, oh, anyway, yeah. And yet she gets sick. So how's she going to deal with that? How's she going to resolve that dissonance? Oh, well, Hubbard also says if you pour, you get the point. So Carl says, okay. And then she says, One of the interesting things for me after going clear is that other people seem so much nicer. It was the strangest thing. Like, wow, everyone is so nice all of a sudden. No one's giving me any trouble. It was really interesting. Now, this I highlighted as one of these points of subjective as fact, right? She has this impression or idea that after she went clear, everybody around her was nicer to her. I very much doubt that's true. I have a lot of skepticism about that statement, but I believe firmly that she believes that, and she states it as fact. And this is something that you'll see. It's a subtle point, you know. This isn't like a hit you over the head with a hammer kind of thing, but that's kind of the nature of the kind of the insidiousness of cult thinking is it warps your ability to observe the real world or observe yourself and your experiences. And it always has to be wrapped around into the best possible translation, the best possible explanation. Has to be that way. And she's making it out that ever since she was clear, the world has been her oyster and everybody has been super nice to her. Kind of weird and kind of interesting, right? Okay, Fabian, thank you very much for that super chat I see that you put there. Like I said, this is not a Q&A show, so I'm not going to be taking up questions today, okay? So I appreciate you asking me that. If you want to send that to me in an email or something, I would definitely answer your question, Fabian. Just not today in this format, okay? Thank you. Okay, let's carry on with our transcript. So we go further down, and she starts talking about, oh, it's interesting, by the way. She goes into, okay, good. Thanks, Fabian. She goes into talking about co-auditing and how you can audit and set up with somebody else and audit one another. And you could theoretically, you could get all the way up to clear doing that. Yet it's interesting how the whole tone of her statements about it tend to be rather negative. And it's really interesting because it was something I, as a Scientologist, tried to promote a lot was, hey, you don't have to have a lot of money. You know, you can co-audit, you can get trained and you can work with another person. But it's really interesting how there's sort of this underlying concept in Scientology, just culturally, that you can co-audit if you want to, you know, it's that kind of attitude, which isn't that fascinating given how expensive Scientology auditing is? Erica, thank you very much for that super chat. Very appreciated. So you got to pay all this money, and we always talk about how ridiculous the amounts of money are. I mean, we're talking about thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars to get to the state of clear and to move on up to the OT levels. It's minimum $500,000. Yet here's a way to do it without having to spend all that. And somehow in the world of Scientology, it's just, well, if you want to. It's weird, isn't it? It's just kind of one of those weird things that sticks out to me, and it stuck out to me here, you know? Yeah, here's how, in fact, I'll share with you. Here's how she says it. Sally says, you can buddy up with somebody. And she says, you can do that with the book. I don't usually recommend it. But, people do it. They read the book and they go, okay, let's go. And then they just sort of bang away at each other's engrams. It's usually not pretty smooth. But you know what? They make progress. They make progress. Or you can pay for a class, like a professional training class. That's about $200, but then you're professionally trained and you can keep up with somebody else professionally trained. There's different ways. You can pay to have it professionally done, but there's different ways. And yet you can kind of get that she's sort of discouraging any other way than the professional route. And she's not even a staff member. She's just some person who audits people with Dianetics out in the field, which means outside of an official Scientology organization. But she is an official Scientologist. She's not an independent Scientologist. So just a little cultural mention there. Okay, now we're going to get into a little bit of fact checking. This is Sally saying that so Carl tells her that he has gotten Dianetics, The Modern Science of Mental Health, the original book from 1950 that kind of started all of this. And he bought it, and he got it from the library. Then he decided to buy it. And Sally says, wow, I'm impressed that you can read that book, because I'll tell you, that book was written in 1950, and that was the high school reading level at the time. And Carl says, really? And she says, yeah. I now run into college graduates with master's degrees who struggle with reading that book because the literacy level has dropped since 1950. Yeah, so I'm impressed. This is her, little bit of love bombing, right, in Carl's direction. Like, ooh, you read Dianetics and you understood it? I'm so impressed. I looked at that and I thought, is that true? Is that really true? Because I'll tell you in a second why Dianetics is so hard to read. And it isn't because of literacy level. But let me share this with you. Let me see if I can throw this up on the screen here. This is a little bit that I found on patterns of literacy among U.S. students. And this is a paper, and this is a summary of the paper. But the point here is that literacy skills of 9-year-olds in the United States have increased modestly over the past 40 years, while the skills of 13 and 17-year-olds have remained relatively flat. Literacy skills vary considerably among students. However, for example, the literacy skills of roughly 10% of 17-year-olds are at the level of the typical 9-year-old. Now, that's a modern statement about this. Then, pursuing this further, I found this graph. The progress of global literacy. And the top line at the very, very top there is the United States, that light blue line. And as you can see, it starts out around 80% of, this is the share of 14 or 15-year-olds or older who are able to read and write. This is literacy level. And back all the way pre-1900s, it was 80%. And then you can see it flatlines around 100% or goes up into that range or thereabouts in the United States. And you can see every other nation here: France, Russia, Brazil, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Mali, and then the total world, which is the black line. They're all going up. All of them. From 1950 to now, all of them are going up. So what does that tell us? It tells us that Sally has no idea what the hell she's talking about. It's not literacy level that has made it impossible to read Dianetics, The Modern Science of Mental Health. That's not the problem. The problem with Dianetics, The Modern Science of Mental Health is it's written in ridiculous language that is so obtuse and stupid that it literally takes grinding through the first 100 pages. And I'm talking like, I read that book 4 times when I was in Scientology. She makes claims that she's read it 7 times. It's a hard book to read because it's a very badly written book. Not just the claims that are made or the statements that are made, but just the language that's used. It's ridiculous. He repeats himself over and over again. He makes statements that really, literally don't make any sense. And he expects you to follow along as though Dianetics is, parallel with or at the same order of magnitude as the invention of fire and the wheel. And it's ridiculous, and that's the problem with Dianetics, is that its language and the use of language and writing it is incredibly poor. It was Hubbard trying to write academically. And he made a mash of it because Hubbard doesn't know how to write academically. He's never had an academic thought in his life. Never, so that's my little, statement on this. But I highlighted all of this business about literacy because, again, we're dealing here with objectively false information that Sally is running around with. And then her motivated reasoning as to why this would make sense that people would have a hard time getting through Dianetics. Oh, it's the literacy levels. No, it's not. And it never was. And I think that's kind of fascinating. I don't know, Martha, that he was high. I think he was drunk. I think Hubbard wrote a lot of that book while he might have been drinking. Okay, but that's just my conjecture. So we carry on here with our transcript. And okay, so they're talking about reading the book. And boy, kudos to Carl for getting through this thing. He says, today I read 40 pages of Dianetics and, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now there's another part she gets into. Carl says, I discovered that the copy I got is not the latest edition. And he says, is that okay? I think it's from 2002. And here's what she says. Sally says, correct. That is not the latest edition. On that book, the part that's missing until 2007, I did keep my old ones with my notes in it. I think this is the current one, the 2007. What didn't get put in the earlier editions is the synopsis. Now, that's objectively a false statement. It's just her ignorance. The synopsis that is included in the 2007 edition of Dianetics was included in some earlier printings. I went and checked. Certainly in the 9th printing it was. That one I can say for sure. And so the synopsis was not something new that had been left out. It had been taken in and taken out and taken in and taken out a couple times. Oh, thank you, Preacher, for those super chats, and Larry Marvin. Appreciate that. So this synopsis is a short, maybe 5 or 10 pages summary of all the principles that are laid out in the book, but it's at the very beginning of the Dianetics book. And she is basically parroting David Miscavige in saying here it had been left out of all the earlier editions. And if you remember, in 2007, when Miscavige released all these new books and said that they had all been revised and that they had to go back and go through them because there had been all these evil transcriptionists, and Sally will talk about this more here. They had removed things and moved things around and changed and altered it and made it all worse. Not true at all. Hubbard just didn't know how to write and check his own damn work. And then Miscavige blamed it all on the secretaries and transcribers and transcriptionists and editors and stuff, right? And he made them all the scapegoats for all of Hubbard's errors and nonsense. So this is just another kind of example of that I was going to highlight here with the synopsis, because she just doesn't even know what she's talking about, but she's saying it as though it's absolute fact. She says, yeah, he says, is the synopsis written by L. Ron Hubbard? She says, yeah, but it got left out. And like I said, it's a synopsis and, blah, 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 blah. So, yeah, here she says, but that is what's different, because what happened in 2007, there was this big project. She's explaining to Carl. But this was the one book that L. Ron Hubbard actually typed out himself and sent to the publisher. After that, all his later books, he wrote a lot of books, he dictated. And if you've watched me and John talk about this stuff, John is quite clear, and rightfully so, that no, most of L. Ron Hubbard's books following Dianetics were compilations put together by other people of work from Hubbard's lectures or writings, and they just turned it into books. Problems of Work, Fundamentals of Thought, Science of Survival even was L. Ron Hubbard on a dictaphone, and then, what was his name? Richard DeMille was the one who actually compiled it all and made it make sense from Hubbard's ramblings. And that's where we have the second book of Dianetics, Science of Survival. So anyway, just wanted to point that out as just another thing where she takes in the church's PR, she takes in Miscavige's statements, and just accepts them as absolute fact when even it took me 10 minutes to fact check this, right? It was nothing. Anybody could do it. Anybody could look online and see that the synopsis was in earlier editions, that the changes were not because of that L. Ron Hubbard did not dictate all his books and they were all, his work. It's all nonsense. But she has totally bought into the party line, and that's what she's regurgitating here. In fact, here's what she says. And so before 2007, Sally says, teams actually sat down and re-listened to the tapes from the dictaphone and found that editors and typists and stuff had altered things. Some of it was just kind of not a big deal, and I know someone who actually interviewed one of the editors and it was like, well, I didn't like the way that paragraph was put together, so I moved it. Who do you think she's talking about that knew one of the editors? My guess is David Miscavige. I think she's just making that shit up because she's just regurgitating David Miscavige talking from the stage. So she says, someone I know knew one of the editors, right? And so any books before 2007, and this is actually really important to the Scientology mindset, any books before 2007 were essentially tampered with. This book, Dianetics, is the least tampered of them all because Ron actually typed it up himself. So all that's missing in this one is the synopsis. Not at all true, right? Yeah, L. Ron Hubbard did type it up, but did you know that there were 3 appendices that were originally included in Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health in 1950 that were removed? They were there with Hubbard's authorization. He had even, worked to get them written and put into his own book. Nobody else did that. He did. She has no idea what she's talking about. That's what's so fascinating about this. Okay, so another examples here as we go, as we carry on here. Okay. Oh, here we go. Okay, so this is a tough one. All right, let me get a drink here before we carry on. All right. Sorry if that was on mic. Okay. So Carl asks her a question right out of Dianetics, and Tony Ortega has brought this up, and it's a damn good point. Carl reads to her from Dianetics. He says, quote, "The 7-year-old girl who shudders because a man kisses her is not computing. She is reacting to an engram, since at 7, she should see nothing wrong in a kiss, not even a passionate one. There must have been an earlier experience, possibly prenatal, which made men or kissing very bad." That's the quote from Dianetics. You want to kiss a 7-year-old? She shouldn't have any problem with it at all unless she's got engrams telling her to. What the? How? Who even thinks that way? L. Ron Hubbard thought that way. So he brings it up to her. Says, hey, what about this? And he says, what does that mean? And here's Sally's response. And it's all highlighted in green. Motivated reasoning. Here we go. Well, remember, this was written in 1950. And in 1950, little girls were not being taught about sexual assault. Nowadays, a 7-year-old girl shudders because a man kisses her. It is because she has an engram on that, or because she learned in first grade that this is really bad. So nowadays, maybe not. But anybody who has a really strong emotional reaction to something that does not contain pain and unconsciousness, probably that's not good. She's saying the reaction is not good, Not the fact that some fucking asshole is kissing a 7-year-old passionately. That's not the bad part here. The bad part is the little girl's emotional response of revulsion and disgust at some pedophile making advances at her. But that's the motivated reasoning in her mind to make that make sense. Hubbard has to make sense. That's the point. And she will bend her mind into a pretzel to make it make sense. Oh, now they're taught that it's not okay, so maybe that's why they might have a reaction. No, they might have a reaction because it's disgusting and wrong. Carl says, okay. And she goes on and says, yeah. And as the auditor's like, I don't know where it is, when it is, what it is, but yeah. So if a little girl, especially one who has not been taught about sexual assault, if she's having a really bad reaction to the man kissing her, she's probably got an engram. So if you're wondering, if you've ever wondered how it is that Scientologists, specifically Scientologists now, can rationalize, justify, and be even okay with the sexual assault of minors, this is how. They just motivate themselves into reasoning it out to make it make sense. And I have said many times, and I will continue to say, a person is capable of believing anything if you give them a good enough reason to. Well, that reason doesn't always have to come from outside the person's head. Oftentimes, they will come up with their own good reasons to believe absolutely awful things. And that's probably the most egregious example in this interview of exactly what I'm talking about. So wanted to share that with you guys. Just awful stuff. So they go on to going clear, what it means to go clear. And basically, this is kind of interesting because without the state of clear is defined in Scientology as a being or an individual who no longer has his own reactive mind. And the reactive mind, for those of you out there not heard about this, not clear on this, the reactive mind is that part of your mind that Hubbard created. This doesn't really exist, but he created this idea that there is this part of the mind that records all the incidents of pain and unconsciousness and trauma that exist in your life. Every incident that you've ever encountered of pain and unconsciousness, even if it was a slight moment, even if it was a millisecond of unconsciousness, you hit your head with a hammer or something, you got a moment of unconsciousness there. That's all recorded in the reactive mind, and those incidents are called engrams. And when you are free of all of your engrams and you no longer have them anymore and the bank has been cleared out, you have achieved the state of clear and you're no longer going to be impeded by all that past trauma. That's the basic idea of it. And it is not a measurable, verifiable, attainable state in the real world. One, because there is no reactive mind. Two, because there are no engrams. The brain and the mind and how we think and memory and all that does not work anything like any of that. But this is all Hubbard's theory. And it is therefore, because it's a delusional state, right? Because it's not real, it's purely subjective. It's all in your mind, right? For Scientologists, you can be clear anytime you want to be. You just say you're clear. It's really pretty much that significant. There's no change. There's no difference in your life being a clear. I was a clear in Scientology. I do know what I'm talking about on this exact point. There's no difference. And the point of it being purely subjective is quite interesting because that's something I have said many times, but you don't usually hear Scientologists say it. And here Sally does. He's asking her about it, and she says, how do you know you're clear? And she says, oh, and that I heard that when you say blah, 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 that means you're clear. Here she's talking about the clear cognition. There is a thing in Scientology. It's called the clear cognition. A cognition in Scientology is a realization about something, mostly yourself. Oh, wow, I didn't realize I was doing that because blah, 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 right? That would be a cognition. So she's poo-pooing this. She's saying, oh, I heard that you say blah, blah, blah. That means you're clear. Well, that's because that is what that's the truth. In Scientology, if you say, I no longer have to create or mock up my own reactive mind. Oh, I've been the one doing that. I don't have to do that anymore. Boink, it's gone. That's the clear cognition. It's highly confidential. What I just told you is very, very confidential in Scientology. And it is a thing. I've seen it in writing. This is not a debatable point. So she's saying, well, I heard if you say blah, 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 then that means you're clear. No, a person needs to reach that, achieve that with their own awareness. So clear is very precise. Yeah, it's precise as you drank the Kool-Aid, the Flavor Aid. You're the one who decides. And as long as it's real to you that you have been creating or mocking up your own reactive mind, oh, boink, suddenly it's gone. These people, right? So it's just funny how she doesn't even see what she's actually saying. That's what's so interesting to me about this. So Carl's like, okay. And then she goes on to say, it's an exact thing. And then you no longer have your own reactive mind. So now, wow, you just go for, blah, blah, blah. And he says on her certificate, okay, now we're going to get into her motivated reasoning for why her clear status was taken away from her and she had to earn it back. Thank you, Anthony, for that super chat. Okay, and Anthony, as I said at the top here, I'm not answering questions today, so please don't put them in the super chats because it just makes me feel bad for not answering them. But I'm on a track here, and we're going to be doing this right now. Thank you. So he notices that her clear certificate hanging on the wall saying that she has achieved the state of clear. She notices that it doesn't, or he notices rather, that there's no date on the certificate. He goes, oh, there's no date. And she says, there's no date because in the late 1970s, I did a lot of Dianetics and I thought I was clear. Said certain things that would indicate I was clear. And what we call attested. I have like an exam type thing, not a written exam, but it's like, yep, you're clear, and it was acknowledged. Well, you know how I was telling you how all the different books got revamped? Well, at that time, more information was found about the state of clear. And the difference between clear and a really, really big release, where your reactive mind is parked aside, that you can't find anything in it anyway, and you're functionally clear. Now, she's using a word here, release. This is a specific Scientology word. It has a definition in Scientology that means that your case or your reactive mind or the crap you're trying to deal with, your collective trauma, it's still there. You haven't erased it. It just moved way far away from you. Because in Scientology, your trauma is contained in energy fields around your body. And you carry that around with you. That's your mind. It's an energy field kind of thing. And it's made up of energy masses that Hubbard says can be measured. And we'll talk about that in a few when we get to the E-meter stuff. So she's alluding to that, and she's saying that she didn't really go clear. She just had this big release. And she had to go back and get more auditing to get to the actual state of clear where it was actually erased. You see the infinite loop of reasoning that could be used here to suck people dry of their money? Because that's how this was used. right? In the mid 2000s, this was the big deal in Scientology, was going back and telling all the people who had gone clear, no, not really. You just had a release. And we're going to bring you back to the real state of clear by auditing you a lot more. But oh boy, that's going to cost you money again. Sorry. That was it. That was how it was done. And they got thousands and thousands of people to agree to go back over their auditing and do it all over again to get back to this subjective state of clear. Even if they had given the clear cognition, they had to give it again. It was that fucked up for them. And there were a lot of people who were really upset about this. Really upset. But the church didn't care. We just want the money. And that's how they did it. That was exactly how they did it. So I thought you guys might find that kind of interesting. So they carry on in their talk. Let's carry on here. We're really just getting into this. Okay, we move on a little bit further, and yeah, here we go. So here's her description of what the difference is between the release and the clear. He says, is the difference large? And Sally says, in terms of how I function in life, no. That really was a big release. My reactive mind was not causing me any trouble in terms of my awareness of myself and my relationship to the universe and other people. Oh yeah, it was the right move. At the time, I was like, I am so clear. So I guess she went from being kind of clear to so clear. And this had some, fantastic subjective. Again, this is all in her mind. No difference in the real world, right? In terms of my awareness of myself and my relationship to the universe and other people. Oh yeah, big differences. What does that even mean? It doesn't really mean anything. Okay, we carry on. They're talking about getting auditing and going up to clear. And then, okay, now here's a little bit more on this co-auditing business and on this thing about getting trained. And again, she's kind of given up a little bit more than she thinks she is in talking about this stuff. She says, she took several months, maybe a year. Finally, I was auditing other people, but I finally got to clear. And then she says, because when you train as an auditor, Ron already tells you what you're looking for and what to look for. And you see how it all works. So when you do your own sessions, when you're going in session as a pre-clear, it's like, oh, I see where this is going. And what exactly are we asking the pre-clear to do? Like if I were sitting here auditing you right now, and we find an engram or an incident, and I say, go to the beginning of the incident, go through it and all that, I can't see what you're looking at, right? I don't know what you're looking at. I give the command, you look, and then you get to see it, and then you answer. And you tell me, oh, well, I'm riding my tricycle and blah, blah, blah. And Carl says, okay. And she says, so a pre-clear is, just reading the book will help a lot. If a pre-clear's also a trained auditor, oh, they know exactly what they're supposed to be doing. And if I say go to the beginning of the incident, and I know they go to the beginning of the incident. A pre-clear who doesn't know anything, I'm never quite sure where they went and what they're looking at. I can usually figure it out pretty fast, pretty easy, because I've been doing this since 1978. Okay, what she's describing here is what I have referred to as priming. You're priming the person. You're setting them up for what to expect in the auditing session so that they go through everything and jump through all the hoops the way you want them to as a good little PC. This is not good psychological practice. You don't tell somebody what to do and what to expect and what the end result's going to be, and that before you even carry out a procedure or a treatment modality on them. You begin a treatment modality, and what happens, happens. And it's not on you as a therapist or a psychologist to judge or decide what the person is doing in their mind with what you're asking or telling them. You just roll with what happens, and you use that to inform your decision making as to how to continue with the process or the procedure or the treatment modality. That's how psychology works, and that's a far more ethical practice than what's going on in auditing, where it's all very ultra controlled. And she doesn't get that. She thinks that's a feature, not a bug. She thinks that's a good thing, that you're all primed and ready to go. You know exactly what to expect and exactly what to do, and you very dutifully jump through all the hoops you're supposed to jump through as a pre-clear in the auditing session because you're trained and you know what's expected of you. Sounds like it makes sense until you really think about it and realize that's not how psychological treatment should work. Unless you're trying to just factory production line everybody through the same process and demand the same result from all of them. And that is not how treatment works. So big, huge differences here. And I wanted to highlight this because it's one of the major differences between psychological counseling or therapy and auditing, and why it's a gross, gross misnomer to call Scientology auditing counseling. And I've had to use that word many times to describe it because I'm trying to give some people some analogy or some comparison of what auditing is. But I hope I'm showing here that auditing is nothing like therapy or treatment. It's actually a dictatorially controlled therapy session where if you, as the pre-clear, as the patient, don't do exactly what you're told to do, you're the one who's wrong. And you're not going to get the results. And you're out ethics. And you can end up in trouble in Scientology for not complying, not conforming to their model. And Sally is clueless about this. She's just blabbing on about this as though this is the greatest thing in the world, and isn't it so wonderful? And she has no idea what she's actually saying. And I just thought that was worth talking about. Okay, so we continue on. Just going to check in here. Okay, good. I was just about to say, I'm going to check in on the comments and see how we're doing here. And somebody's like, this is an interesting show. Good. Okay, good. Then I'm getting across what I want to. Okay, let's continue. Blah, 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 Scientology community. I have no idea, by the way, where this was done, what church she's connected to, or any of that. It's all redacted in here. So this could be from anywhere. And yet, isn't it interesting how I immediately can connect all of this with my own experience? Because again, Scientology is all about conformity of experience and compliance. It is an authoritarian totalist system. And that's why I can say that with such certainty, right? Is that people in Europe, people in Australia, people in India are going to be put through the same paces with the same bullshit as I was put through, as anybody in Scientology was put through, because it's same. And again, completely opposite to how actual therapy works. Okay, now we get to Time magazine. And this was interesting because there's mixes here of just objectively false information that she's giving to Carl and motivated reasoning. So let's take a look at this. Remember in 1991, Time magazine, I think it was 91 or 92, Time magazine, Richard Behar wrote a scathing takedown of Scientology. It was cover story, Time magazine, Scientology, the cult of greed. And our heads exploded when that came out. I was in Scientology. I was a staff member in Santa Barbara at the time. I had not yet joined the Sea Org. And we were fit to be tied about that. We were so upset about this article and the bad press and theta of Time Magazine. And Time Magazine became enemy number one to Scientology at that moment. And they sued Time Magazine for tens of millions of dollars, lost the suit eventually. They did not get a win on that lawsuit, but the very fact of the lawsuit and the pressure and the expense of having to defend themselves gave Time Magazine and lots of other media outlets in the early 90s the very clear idea that they needed to steer way clear of Scientology and not report on it, not talk about it objectively or factually, because they would get sued and be tied up in court for years. I think it took like 3 years or something to settle that damn thing. And Scientology came out ahead because they were, saber rattling. They were throwing their weight around. They don't really do that anymore. You notice that? It all kind of shut down after Lisa McPherson. Funny that. Okay, so let's go into the interview itself. So Sally says to Carl, people who aren't Scientologists, sometimes they come across it and they say the most interesting things. And I'm like, where in the world did they come up with that? Right? She's trying to what's called dead agent or sort of nullify anything bad that she has seen about Scientology. And she's actually introducing it to Carl and saying, I just can't believe some of the stuff people think and say. And she says, okay, like I'm going to give you an example from years ago. Time Magazine put out this slimy thing about us years ago. And so the church investigated who did that and then uncovered some very unsavory things about those people. So Time leaves us alone now. That is all totally false. Nothing she just said is true. That the saber rattling and the legal threats and the tens of millions of dollars is what shut Time Magazine up, not Richard Behar's dirty laundry or skeletons in his closet. There wasn't anything to really expose, and there wasn't any problem there. But she goes with the party line, and she actually believes, this is how twisted Scientology gets, is those who did it and then uncovered some very unsavory things about those people. That's what L. Ron Hubbard says to do to your enemies, is go blackmail them into silence. Again, she thinks that's a feature, not a bug. She thinks that's a plus, not a minus. That's how twisted her morality is because of what L. Ron Hubbard has done to her. And she thinks that's the reason Time Magazine leaves them alone. Not even remotely. And she, of course, completely ignores the fact that it's open field day on Scientology now in the media. So she carries on and she says, oh yeah, then she goes into some more bullshit, right? She's talking about Time and she says, anyway, I did see a thing once in Time Magazine on the drills, she's talking about the communication drills, the TRs. And she says, where we're learning to just, she describes it and says, we're just learning to sit relaxedly and listen to what the pre-clear is saying and not be startled by what he's saying. And that is what those drills, one of those drills, are purportedly for. So she's right about that. But then she says, see, and Time Magazine said, we were actually communicating with people on Mars. That's her claim. She says, Time Magazine reported that we were using these drills to communicate with people on Mars. Well, guess what? I went and looked up the entire text of the 1991 or 2 article from Time Magazine, and I read through all of it. The word Mars does not come up anywhere in any of the graphics, info pieces, or text of the article. They never, ever, ever said that. She's just making shit up. And she's telling Carl this as though it's absolutely true, and it's not. And she said, so she says this bullshit that they said that they were telling, people that were, communicating with people on Mars. And I said, really? I mean, if you're communicating with someone on Mars, you're not doing the drill right. You're supposed to be communicating with your pre-clear. Also, I don't think there's anybody on Mars. And that was one of the ones that was so outrageous. It was just like, I have no idea. I have no idea where somebody came up with that. But if my slime stuff comes up about Dianetics and Scientology, there's... but if any slime stuff comes up about Dianetics and Scientology, there's one thing I've never seen. Well, Sally, I've never seen it either because it doesn't exist, right? Nobody ever said that. At least not that I could find. And I did go looking through that whole article. And then she says, so then she says, even in all the slime, even in all the awfulness of all the N theta and horrible stuff that people report on Scientology, she says one thing that they never mess with. And Carl goes, oh, yeah, what's that? She says, they never mess with the state of clear. I have never seen any detracting anything try to say that clear does not exist. And I find that fascinating. That's what she says. Again, complete bullshit. I have... tons of people in ex-Scientology community have taken down the state of clear, just like I did today. It's a subjective state of delusional nonsense. That's what the state of clear is, and we've said that from the get-go. In fact, Richard Behar said that in 1990s in the Time magazine article. And it's been said many, many times. So she's, again, just feeding Carl total bullshit because she has to believe that clear is this vaunted, amazing state that nobody could touch and everybody's nicer to her and everything has been wonderful and it's been sunshine and butterflies ever since she attained the state of clear. So she won't hear anything bad about it. Well, that much is true. She definitely doesn't see it because she can't. Right? Motivated reasoning. She can't even see it. Tammy, thank you very much for that super chat. Very appreciated. I hope I'm catching everybody who's been contributing today. I really love that. Okay, so, all right. Okay, good. Let's carry on. Oh, wow, we're an hour into this already. How are we doing? All right. Oh, yes. Let's carry on. This is going quite well. Okay, so then Carl comes back with this. I love this kid. I don't know who this kid is. I really hope if he's watching or in all tuned into my channel, please contact me. I would love to talk to you about this. Not even necessarily on air. I would just love to talk to you about this. This was ballsy as hell. I really, really appreciate that this kid did this. So, and maybe I shouldn't call him a kid. Anyway, very, very well done, Carl, whoever you are. So Carl says, about the stuff on Mars. I heard claims that Scientologists believe that when you die, your soul is sent to Venus or Mars and it gets brainwashed. Is that true? I love this guy. And Sally says, no. She's lying. We've heard L. Ron Hubbard talk about this. He talks about trains on Venus. He talks about implant stations on Mars in his lectures. Sally has heard these lectures. There's no way she's been in Scientology since the 1970s and doesn't know about implant stations and Mars and Venus and the Galactic Empire Confederacy and the invader forces and all of the cosmology and nonsense of the mythology of Scientology. She's steeped in it. But she's telling Carl, oh, no, that's not true. And she goes on to give this kind of nonsensical rant about how he's brushing up against the subject of past lives. And now we're broaching the subject of past lives in Scientology. And she makes the claim that back in 1950, in the early 1950s, L. Ron Hubbard was running into past lives in the auditing that was happening, and as soon as you validate that, she says, we're not going to evaluate whether the person lived before or not. You run what comes up. Yeah, right. There are numerous forms of Scientology auditing that absolutely demand that you go past life. They're just not successful if you don't. You cannot stay in this life material and get all the way up the bridge in Scientology. You have got to go past lives. And you're supposed to do it pretty damn early on. So again, she's just telling him nonsense. But then she says, you run what comes up, and all those cases began to fly again. See, the assertion she's making is they were repressing the past life memories back in the 50s, and they wouldn't let people run the past life memories, and that's what was stopping their progress. She's regurgitating L. Ron Hubbard. And those cases began to fly again, she says. So that's where the subject of past lives came in, and L. Ron Hubbard kept researching, and he kept researching. No, he didn't. L. Ron Hubbard never did a day of research in his life. He just made shit up, or he based his conclusions on a case study of one or two people, himself always being one of those people. So this is just, again, blatant falsehoods being passed on to Carl here about the past and the research trail of Scientology. So Carl says, okay. And she goes into past life stuff here. Oh, thank you, Rexican Messler, for your super chat there. Clogged, yes. The state of clear should actually be called the state of clogged. Got that right. That's good. Okay. So we come to some more motivated reasoning here. So Sally comes along and talks about past lives, and and she really gets into it. Now, here's something I wanted to say during all of this. Scientologists are basically desperate for people to talk to. I don't know if you guys know that or not, but they are. They just can't help themselves. And as soon as somebody comes along who expresses even a little bit of curiosity and starts asking questions about the beliefs and the ideas and the experiences of Scientology, the Scientologists will not shut up about it. I mean, Carl here is just kind of giving very non-committal, short answers through all of this. She's the one doing the brunt of the talking. Why? Because she's desperate to get these revelations across to other people, and she wants to download all of it as quickly as possible. I felt the exact same way as a Scientologist. Lots and lots of Scientologists do. So it's not hard to do this, to get them to open up and talk, if you express some genuine curiosity and interest. Okay, and I wanted to make that point because one of the things I talk about on my channel a lot is the fact that if you're going to be dealing with somebody who's in a destructive cult, whether it's Scientology or the JWs or, NXIVM or anything, any kind of destructive cult situation, curiosity, interest, questions, that's where you're going to get the person to open up, right? Trying to give them all the facts and all the data and all of the reasons they're wrong and their beliefs are wrong and they're stupid. That's never going to get you anywhere. But look at how easy it is to get somebody to open up if you just ask a few, sharp and pointed questions and express some interest. And that's kind of what this is a case study in, and that's why I was a little excited about it and wanted to point that point out. Okay, let's carry on with the nonsense reading here. So, so this was an interesting part, and I wanted to kind of go over this a little bit. They're talking about past lives, and she's basically alluding to implants without using the word. She says currently on this particular world, Earth, it's become an electronic world. Well, there have been other worlds in our past that also had electronics. And there have been times when a person's body dies, they sort of were indoctrinated to forget that life. And Carl says, does that happen every time someone dies? And she says, well, the indoctrination was a really, really, really long time ago. But most people, not everybody, most people, when their body dies, will remember everything and be aware. Now, that really took me by surprise because that's not how I used to think as a Scientologist. And she goes on to say, now I'm a nurse. I've been around plenty of people who died, non-Scientologists. one for one, you could sort of feel the spiritual essence of them coming out of the body, kind of going, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. Why'd I hang on to that lump so long, right? Because now they're not in pain, et cetera, et cetera. So I've seen this. This is her talking. When the memory loss happens is when they take the new body, and usually it's done like it's just a bad habit you don't have to forget. Bullshit. She doesn't even know Scientology, and she's auditing on OT7. What she just described is not at least not my understanding. And maybe I'm out to lunch on this, but I don't think so. L. Ron Hubbard was pretty clear about this. In fact, so much so that he said one of the biggest fears Scientologists have is that they're going to kick off, they're going to drop their body, and they're going to forget everything. They're not going to remember, they're not going to know, and they're not going to be able to come back to Scientology, and they're not going to go spiritually free. And he said this is a valid concern. And the solution to that is to get trained as well as get audited. But you got to get audited. You got to get to OT, and you got to get up the bridge, or that's exactly what's going to happen to you, is that amnesia is going to kick in because of all those implants from all those years ago, and you're going to get screwed, right? Now, Hubbard also made claims in various lectures in various places that there were still operational implant stations here on Earth. So much so that I know for a fact that some Scientologists unofficially went looking for them. They went down to Mexico looking for them. Hubbard talks about how there's an implant station in the Pyrenees Mountains. He says this stuff, just throws it out there randomly here and there. But he very definitely said that. I'm not making that up. So I find it interesting that her interpretation of this as she's explaining it to Carl is, oh, no. When you drop your body, you're suddenly aware of everything again. No, you're not. That's not how this works at all. But it certainly is interesting that she thinks so. I found that absolutely fascinating. And he says, oh, so the people choose to forget? And she says, choose, or they just think they're supposed to, and you don't have to. Well, my next question, and this was not Carl's next question, but my next question to Sally would have been, oh, so then why do I need Scientology at all? I mean, if you can just choose not to forget everything and be spiritually aware and amazing after you die, then why do you need Scientology at all? Goes right over her head. And Carl says, do you remember your past lives? And she says, many. And he wants to know about them. And she's like, no. Now, this is where we get into this subjective stuff, okay? And this is kind of, I don't know what you'll make of this. But she says, no, a person's past lives are a person's past lives. I can tell you this. Some of them were really boring. I don't remember much about those. But it would be like me asking, what did you have for breakfast on March 3rd, 2002? It's like, who cares? And some were really interesting. No, I was never anybody famous. A couple of times I've had connections to somebody famous, like a servant in their household. You know what I mean? Carl's like, okay. And she goes, so you think there's been a few times where I knew famous people? Oh, yeah. So she says, think there's been a few times where I've known famous people. I can tell you now, this isn't mine. It's from somebody who used to be real active in this Dianetics group, but he's since moved away. So he and another guy from the Dianetics group, they were auditing each other. They would audit here, and I wasn't really supervising them. And one day this guy comes in, and he was pretty sick. He was coughing, and he felt like crap. And the guy who was auditing him said, all right, let's run it. The guy did tell me he could share this, by the way. Carl says, okay. So she says, otherwise, I would never talk about somebody's engrams, no matter how interesting. So anyway, they're in here for a while, and they come out laughing. So this guy who'd gotten sick had a fight with his wife the night before. Just to be clear, nobody hit each other. It wasn't a super vile fight, you know, but they had argued. And he got really, really sick. So he runs this session, you know, him getting sick, and an earlier time it happened. And anyway, he ends up in a past life where he had been married to this woman at that time too. Carl says, the same woman? Sally says, yep, yeah, you run into that sometimes. He goes, oh, interesting. She says, if someone's married this lifetime, it doesn't mean they've been married before, but it happens. So anyway, he'd been married to her before, like long time, hundreds and hundreds. They're peasants way back in the way long time ago, and he caught her cheating. And she and her lover, and remember, this is like hundreds and hundreds of years ago, she and her lover, when he was sleeping, set fire to the hut, and he died of smoke inhalation. So this guy has like no memory of this, you know? He's not walking around thinking this, but as I'm going down the engram chain, that's how they end up, him coughing, because that's how he died. He died coughing. So on this particular day, here he is. He had a fight with his wife, re-stimulated this whole chain, and he's coughing and feels like he's going to die. And they ran that. The cough stopped instantly. He was going to go to the hospital for bronchitis, but it all got turned off, this cough. And he says, interesting. She says, and they thought it was hilarious. I have no idea if he told his wife about it. She was also getting Dianetics auditing, but that's none of my business. So anyway, I believe in past lives. Other people believe in past lives. I've audited a lot of people who never had a past life, and that's fine. That's her statement. I thought this was a great little window into highlighting for you guys how Scientologists think about this stuff. Because that, I would have said, I'm telling you, I would have explained this to you 10, 20 years ago, exactly as she's explaining it to Carl here. And I believed it just as much as she does. And this is, of course, motivated reasoning, you know, confirmation bias, and regressive, false, fake memories being created to confirm the bias. And, you know, through this has to be true in the past lives and all of that, mixed in with a little bit of fun with a placebo effect of the cough turning off, right? Isn't that interesting? Well, I very, very, very much doubt that this man had anything like bronchitis. But even if we're going to give this a surface level of truth, and really we do need to take all of this with a grain of salt, this gives a window into how Scientologists think about illness and where it comes from. And we so very rarely see actual Scientologists talking this way, so I thought it would be worth sharing for you guys. And this is exactly the kind of stuff that Scientologists believe lies at the bottom of cancer, leukemia, bad eyesight, evil purposes, false purposes, every physical ailment you've ever had, right? They all come down to this kind of thing. And if you can just get in session, find the incident at the bottom of the chain and blow it, right? Release it, get rid of it, your body will be fine. And I hope it's kind of obvious, of course, what dangerous thinking that is. But it might help explain to some of you out there why Scientologists don't get regularly medically screened, and why they don't pay attention to medications until it's too late, why they don't pay attention to doctors until it's too late, and why there seems to be this high incidence of cancer in Scientology. Well, maybe there is and maybe there isn't, but I can tell you for sure one of the reasons that people get cancer in Scientology is because they don't care to even go get examined or checked out like the rest of regular folks do. Because this is how they think you deal with a physical illness or problem. Yeah. Okay, so let's carry on. We're about halfway through the transcript right now, but I don't know how far along we are in the highlights, but let's carry on here. So far, pretty interesting stuff. Oh, yeah. She starts talking about solo auditing and the reason for it, right? Because it's happening so fast. You have to audit yourself. And she brings out an e-meter and she starts explaining to Carl, well, now let's talk about the e-meter and let's talk about Scientology auditing with it. And she gives him the cans and she starts talking about this stuff. And by the way, this she has gone through, in all of her time in Scientology, she has gone through the Mark V, the Mark VI, the Mark VII, the Mark Super 7, the Mark 7 Quantum, and the Mark 8 e-meters. She has had them all, and she has been trained on all of them. And she's bragging about this to Carl. She thinks this is awesome. I think it's hilarious that she's wasted that much money on useless devices. Okay, so we're going to get into... oh boy. What should I do first here? Because I have something to go over with you guys on what an e-meter is actually doing. Let's go ahead and get into this real fast. This is maybe a... yeah, quantum is one of the most abused words in the English language. You got that right, Liz. Let me explain to you a little bit first what an e-meter is actually reading, okay? And this is maybe a little preview of that metering video I've been going on and on about for years. Let's talk about this. Now, I'm going to go into what's called this electrodermal activity, or EDA. And I just pulled up the Wikipedia article on this. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, as there's an awful lot here to go through. But I want to highlight a few things, okay? And I hope this works the way I want it to. EDA, electrodermal activity, is the property of the human body that causes continuous variation in the electrical characteristics of the skin. We're talking about the skin here, okay? You put the e-meter gives, there's a couple of cans, tin cans, aluminum coated cans that you hold. And you hold them in both hands. And an electric current is run over your body. You complete a circuit. And that circuit is measuring skin resistance to the electric flow going over the body. This is called EDA. It's also been called GSR and a lot of other terms. There's a lot of terms for this. Now they're referring to it as electrodermal activity. The traditional theory of EDA holds that skin resistance varies with the state of sweat glands in the skin. Sweating is controlled by the sympathetic nervous system, and skin conductance is an indication of psychological or physiological arousal. If the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system is highly aroused, then sweat gland activity also increases, which in turn increases skin conductance. In this way, skin conductance can be a measure of emotional and sympathetic responses, okay? Now, before you all think that this is absolutely settled science and it's all worked out and everybody understands everything about this, please let me let you know that that is not the case. And in fact, under the bottom here, under possible problems, we find all kinds of variables at play in the measurement of EDA. External factors such as temperature and humidity affect EDA measurements, which can lead to inconsistent results. Internal factors such as medications and hydration can also change EDA measurements, demonstrating inconsistency with the same stimulus level. Also, the classic understanding has treated EDA as if it represented one homogeneous change in arousal across the body, but in fact, different locations of its measurement can lead to different responses. For example, the responses on the left and right wrists are driven by different regions of the brain, providing multiple sources of arousal. Thus, the EDA measured in different places on the body varies not only with different sweat gland density, but also with different underlying sources of arousal. Okay? So, okay, back to me. That's the state of science on EDA or GSR, galvanic skin response, okay? That is what an E-meter is registering, your body. It is not registering your spirit or your spiritual self or energy fields around your body. It's not doing that. It's clearly not doing that. When I try, and I have tried, to explain this to electrical engineers, to people who understand how to read electronic meters, that's their professional life, they laugh at me over this. I've literally taken an E-meter to them and shown it to them, and they just can't stop laughing at Hubbard's ridiculous explanations for what that E-meter is doing. It is not, Hubbard says that the E-meter is registering the impact or influence or impingement on your body of these energy fields. And that's why I said earlier that the mind in Scientology is considered an energy field. It's a series of ridges, Hubbard calls them, of stuck energy flows that have been stuck to you. And you're carrying them around in this mind that you have. And every picture you look at that has charge, that has this electricity connected to it, is contained in the reactive mind. And when you are erasing things in the reactive mind, you are literally erasing, you're destroying energy. Hubbard said that the principle of conservation of energy is bullshit. And that a thetan, a spirit, can freely and easily destroy and create energy at will. So, I mean, when you're at that level of pseudoscience, you know, everything starts becoming just a little bit, you know, you have to look at the world kind of through tilted, weird lenses for this stuff to make sense, because none of it matches up with any science. And in fact, is grossly contradicted by science. So I needed to give you all that first, because she starts explaining the E-meter to Carl. And she doesn't go into the detail I just went into, but I really thought you guys might want that little breakdown first. So she's talking here, she's showing him the E-meter, and she says there's different sizes of cans, that the electrodes you can hold. And she says, there's your needle. And she says, and I don't know what you've read or how much you understand. So what this is measuring, the body has a whole electromagnetic flow. That's how she describes it. The body has a whole electromagnetic flow. The fuck does that mean? And this is simply measuring changes in the resistance of that flow. No, it's not. But that's what she's been told it's doing, and she bought it hook, line, and sinker. She is giving Carl objectively false information and explanations here. So they go on, and okay, so then she explains how it's used in auditing. And she says, I do Dynetics exactly the way it is in the book without the E-meter. She says the E-meter is for more advanced auditing. And so this is how they can tell the difference between what's a release and what's a clear, is the E-meter. No, they're measuring your skin response. They're measuring sweat and muscle tension. An emotional response, but not anywhere near the speed with which Hubbard says it's happening. So she says, so if I say I was asking for an engram, or I was asking for a loss, of some kind, or some traumatic thing, the meter is going to tell me when I hit something. I don't want to say anything that would be a true thing, but if I was asking about certain things that have a possibility of being traumatic, I would be watching for a reaction on the meter. If it doesn't react on the meter, I'm not going for it, because there's either nothing there or it's not developed enough, not available to run. That's how Scientologists basically explain and use an e-meter. Okay, and that's how they think about it, is that the meter is your clue or your lens into what is it that this person needs to deal with or handle, or what's the trauma that's sitting right there that we can deal with right now. And the meter is, Hubbard describes it as a sort of subconscious, just below the level of conscious awareness meter. So you're going to dig stuff up in a person that they're going to respond to on the e-meter that they're not even necessarily fully aware of yet. But if it reads, if it responds on the meter, then the theory goes, it's ready to be run and we're going to tab at it. And that's one of the key justifications for why Scientologists will run a person into the ground, invalidate them, tell them that they are just basically straight up wrong if they don't agree with and cooperate with what the auditor wants them to do in the session, because the e-meter knows all and they don't know shit. This is where that comes from, is her thinking that the meter is reading some electromagnetic flow and there's a change in the resistance of that flow. Yeah. I'm just making faces because I don't even know what words to use at this point. This is fun. I'm having a good time with this. All right. Okay, and then she goes on to say, but that's what in auditing there should be less and less distraction. Be less and less distractions. Yeah. So she's talking about how when you do auditing on somebody, then the responses of the needle on the dial become less and less as you run the incident. Yeah, that's called familiarity. In Scientology, they believe that that's called erasing energy. I mean, the disparity of fact versus motivated reasoning in Scientology is a fascinating study all by itself. You can see why I'm so fascinated by this stuff. People really can believe anything if they think they have a good enough reason to. And so here she's saying, she does a pinch test on him where she literally pinches Carl, and the meter, of course, has a response because he just experienced a little bit of pain, and that's going to, set the body off. And so there's this reaction, and then it's like, okay, Carl, think about it again. Okay, think about it again. Okay, think about it again. And each time you do, the reaction becomes less and less. That's because you're erasing energy, Carl. Didn't you know? And she says, but that's what, in auditing, there should be less and less distractions to the electromagnetic flow. And then there's certain meter phenomena that show it's like, okay, you got it. You're done with that thing. Okay, a floating needle. That's where the needle starts doing this. Okay. So then things get even more interesting, because then Carl asks, what exactly do you do after clear? Now, this is a woman who has been sworn to secrecy about body thetans. She cannot talk about body thetans. Not at all. She cannot mention Xenu. She cannot mention any of this stuff, right? So what's she going to do to talk to Carl about what happens after clear? Well, here's where it goes. How do I describe this? She says, okay, so once a person's clear, no more reactive mind, it's gone. Okay. And she says, and that's spectacular. So as Ron kept researching, he realized as soon as people began hitting past lives, they began to realize that we were starting to look at something not the mind. Not the mind. That there's this spiritual essence of a person. And that's when Scientology was born, because Scientology deals, that's why Scientology is a religion and Dianetics is not. So he's like, well, let's keep researching, and found that even after clear, there will still be certain energy ridges around a person. That still doesn't make you aberrated like a reactive mind will, but it can affect your thinking. I mean, she's tiptoeing around body thetans here and implants. Both of those things. They're two separate things in Scientology. Certainly fully explain them in other videos. But she's just tiptoeing around it without saying it. And I thought she was actually being pretty clever in doing so, to be honest. And he says, okay. And she says it can make you think, it's like, I don't know. I can't really describe it that well. She just kind of gives up after saying that, right? And he goes, are these incidents in past lives? And she says, no. And he says, what are they? And she says, they're just energy ridges. They aren't incidents. Isn't that hard to wrap your wits around? It was really hard to wrap my wits around, she says, right? So I think she's really talking more about implants here than body thetans, because implants would be these examples of heavy, traumatic, big energy force kind of things you'd have carrying around with you in your reactive mind or in your spiritual self that you still have to deal with after you go clear, is you still have all these implants and ridges and things to deal with. And he says, oh, then they can be measured on the e-meter if they're energy. And she says, you can find them that way. And then we have certain procedures where you literally just handle that energy bridge. And now here is my own. This is my win, she says. This is something I'm observing. Other people might not observe this. I don't know. What I'm observing, though, is as I dismantle and blow apart these various energy ridges, because unfortunately there's a lot of them that everybody has, you've been a spiritual being a very, very, very long time. So maybe she's using this energy ridges thing metaphorically to not say body thetans. That's kind of what the impression I get here. So again, she's tiptoeing around highly, highly confidential information in Scientology and trying to explain it in terms that, young Carl here can understand. Because there's no way she can break down Xenu for him and explain body thetans and all that. That'll kill him, right? She can't do that. But she's trying really hard to talk the talk anyway. So I thought that was kind of interesting. You very, very rarely, even when I was in Scientology, no OT would even give me this much. That's kind of interesting to me. She's actually breaking down for this high schooler here more Scientology than my Scientology friends who were OTs would be willing to tell me. They just shut up about it entirely. They were like, you just got to get there. I'm not telling you a damn thing. And that was, what stuck me to it for all those decades I was in Scientology, is I was absolutely dying to find out, what are those OT levels all about? Well, here's Sally breaking it all down. Okay. Energy. You guys are awesome. Energy ruffles have energy ridges. That's right. Okay. So she goes into, so then she goes into, talking more about these ridges. And she says, so that's like one example of something that really bothers a person, and they will have energy ridges around them. And I used to, here's one thing that I did hear OTs talk about when I was in Scientology, is that they could look in a mirror and actually see the energy ridges around their body. That is terrifyingly delusional levels of thinking. If you think about that for a second, they're just seeing things now. So they see these they'll have these energy ridges around them. And anyway, as you take apart these energy ridges and stuff, one's own ability to perceive, which has been increasing all the way through the auditing to go clear. And then after clear, it's like, wow. And then you find out it gets even better than that. It's just like, okay, cool, which you won't have any reality on until you get there. So there you go. Most people can understand clear. That's how she kind of breaks it down for Carl. And then she says she's auditing on OT7, and there are currently 8 OT levels, she tells him, and she says, there's more than that, but they aren't available yet. And in case I get asked this all the time, people ask me, well, if it's only up to OT8 and the other levels aren't released yet, what do Scientologists think about that? Don't they realize there's a problem and it's a con? And no, they don't realize it at all. Here's what she says. There's more than that, but they aren't available yet. The world has to be in sort of a different state itself to get those things released. The OT levels she's talking about. OT levels 9, 10, 11, all the way up through 15. The world has to be in a sort of different state itself to get those levels released. What state is that? She doesn't know. Nobody knows because nobody's defined it clearly in Scientology. That's about as far as they've gone, but she readily accepts it. She's okay with that. The world has to change somehow. So we call those OT levels, which stand for operating thetan. So it's when we are operating more and more as a spiritual being and less and less and less like, well, I want to say Homo sapiens. So she's comparing this spiritual operation to Homo sapiens. And this also gives you a little window, okay, to why OTs are okay with not manifesting telekinesis and other spiritual matter altering powers. Is because they are invested in the spiritual side, which is all about spiritual awareness and ability, see? Where I can stand in a mirror and I can see my energy ridges and I can think a thought and it just happens, like I can find my keys or I can make a traffic light change or I can change the weather. Things that are completely random and coincidental, they will cling to as proof that they are OT, that it's their spiritual self that is gaining all this power, and the physical side, not really so important. You see the little balancing act there? That's where their heads go, because it has to, because there are no spiritual powers or abilities actually being manifested in the real world. So the best they can do is cling to coincidence and chance and circumstance, and use those things to confirm what they want to believe. All right. We're making great progress here. Let's carry on. Okay, so then Carl asks, when you reach OT8, are all the energy ridges gone? And Sally says, I have no idea. I'm not there yet. Good answer. And he says, are you near getting rid of all of them currently? Now she's auditing on OT7. And she says, I don't really know. I'll just keep doing my daily sessions until what we refer to as the case supervisor, the person who supervises the auditor part of me, I'll just keep doing that until she says stop. But I'll tell you what, the changes for me are happening faster and faster. I'm like, oh my gosh, buckle my thetan seatbelt. Here we go. She ain't done until somebody else tells her she's done. Isn't that interesting? Again, she's thinking this is a feature. She's promoting this as though this is like a plus. She could be auditing on that level for another 10 years, waiting for this case supervisor to tell her she's done. And she's just going to dutifully go in session every single day and audit all those body thetans away until she's told she's done. Compliance, conformity, totalist authoritarian system. Just keep putting it out there. All right. And she says, I don't know. I have no idea how much longer I'll be on. I don't know if I'll finish by the end of the year, 2 years, 4 years. I don't know. But truthfully, I don't really care even because I'm having a blast. And then she talks about how every 6 months she has to go back down to Clearwater and pay $2,000 to get what's called a refresher, which she describes as a restudy, and do some more there and make sure she's got it. And she says, anyway, that's really cool. You know, everything is fluffy and wonderful and rainbows and butterflies in this best of all possible worlds that is Scientology. This is how they think. Okay. Pardon me. All right, so oh yeah, then she goes into explaining why they call it flag in Clearwater. Just goes off on a tangent on this, just starts explaining it to Carl. And gives him a whole rundown on the Sea Org, on the beginnings of the Sea Org and Scientology's OT levels. And she says, so in 19, this is, and I'm going to read this to you guys only because I want you to get what Scientologists think and know about this time period and how they think about it. So in 1967, that's when there were no actual OT levels available yet. He was researching. Everybody knew it was coming. He knew about the state of OT, but there was nothing in place yet to get you there. Anyway, I won't give you the whole history of how that happened, but he did realize that to deliver these OT levels, you're going to have to be off what he calls the crossroads of life. So he got a ship. Also at that time, Scientology was still getting attacked by a lot of other groups and stuff. All the movements are. All new religions are. Anyway, and he trained a crew how to run a ship, and they were in the Caribbean. And then they outgrew that, so they got another ship for training auditors, and they got another ship for auditing people, and then they got another. Anyway, they ended up with a flotilla. And the flagship was the ship that Ron was on, right? So this is her understanding of the beginning of the Sea Org and where the OT levels came from and why Hubbard had to run off on a boat to do it. To do all the research. They were not in the Caribbean. They were in the Mediterranean. I suppose an easily made mistake for people who don't know their geography. And they were actually off the coast of Spain and Portugal and Lisbon and that kind of thing. And they went down, I think in 67, they went down to, what is it? The Easter? No, not Easter. Oh, I forgot the name of those damn islands off the coast of Africa. And they got another boat, and they got another boat, and all new religions are attacked. I mean, it's kind of this interesting amalgamation of Miscavige's PR lines over the years about Scientology's beginnings, and her putting that together herself in such a way that she thinks she's making it all make sense. All of this, almost everything she said here, is complete horseshit. None of this is actually true. Hubbard didn't train a crew of sailors. They were lucky to stay alive because he was such a slipshod teacher. They barely made it down to where they were going. I think Las Palmas, that's the place I was thinking of. And around, and eventually over to Greece and various other places. And eventually they got trained through the School of Hard Knocks. But Hubbard did the absolute bare minimum to prepare these people for what they were about to go through. And I'm telling you, it was sheer luck that one of those boats didn't sink and that people didn't die on them. The beginnings of the Sea Org are a horror story, and it only continued as time went on when Hubbard sort of stretched his wings and realized what an authoritarian jerk he could be to these people, and they would just roll over and take it and take it and take it. And that was the beginnings of the Sea Org, if we're really being honest. So, and as far as his researching goes, well, we all know about the story of Hubbard and his pinks and grays and drinking constantly and falling over and breaking things and having motorcycle accidents and all kinds of other nonsense, and calling that spiritual progress and saying, boy, it almost killed me to get this OT level researched. And all he was doing was sitting in his room with maybe not with an e-meter, just daydreaming and making shit up and writing it down. And that is the true history of L. Ron Hubbard and the Sea Org. Yes, Canary Islands. There we go. Those as well. Thank you for that. Okay, so much stuff in my head. Okay, so there we go. So that was just... I just wanted to give you another little glimpse into what Scientologists rewrite history as. You know, they don't know all the grim details, and no one who was there is going to tell them, because that would be very, very bad and end theta. And so the only way you can really learn about this stuff is to talk to the people who were there or read their accounts of it after they get out of Scientology and are willing to actually tell the truth about what a horror show it really was. And she's got this whole idea that Hubbard was this altruistic, glorified saint who was putting a crew together and having to build up this flotilla because they just were so popular and so wonderful. And it was always everybody, all the bad guys were attacking them, but they survived anyway. And just this whole mythology that's risen up out of and around that whole time period. It's really quite interesting what a complete opposite world it is inside Scientology versus what we know to be the truth of the situation. All right, carrying on here. Oh yeah, it's interesting because here she goes into how she is. She talks turkey with Carl. She says, yeah, I have to pay $2,000 per visit when I go down to Clearwater every 6 months for my check. And she says, but my husband and I have been running his remodeling business for years, so it's not an issue. So because here's the other thing. Here's the other piece of that. By the way, I don't know anybody your age, she says, who's on OT7. And he said, yeah, that makes sense. Go Carl. And Sally says, yeah. And I've known some people who are like 20, 21, but they also come from well-to-do families. So there. So my husband and I, we have paid one of my sons, the professional auditor. He's OT5. My other son, he's not clear yet, but getting close. And we have paid for more of his auditing and through OT4. So we're paying for him. So yeah, the people who are really young doing their OT levels, it's usually mom and dad, or they've inherited a bunch. That's an interesting statement. Because here's the thing. Early on, almost on the first or second line of this interview, she asked Carl about whether he's buying his Dianetics books or not, and infers sort of that it's a good thing he bought the books. It's better that he buys them because he needs to have his exchange in for the materials. And then 13 pages later, she's bragging about how kids who get up the OT levels in Scientology only do so if they're kids of well-to-do families and their parents are paying for them and they got an inheritance. Again, she's talking about this as though this is a feature, as though this is a plus. It's just more motivated reasoning, right? It's all highlighted in green here. And she's talking about this freely. This is all a good thing. This is how people get on the OT levels. We're paying for our kids. Where's the exchange from the kids? If exchange is such a big deal, to the point that she wants Carl buying his books, then how does she rationalize giving her kid the OT levels? It's just the standard run-of-the-mill hypocrisy we see out of cult members, and they're completely oblivious to it. All right. Yeah, then she goes into how she, was able to define every single word. They go into studying, and she's talking about, going past words they don't understand, and how she's read Dianetics 7 times. And so not only have I read this book 7 times, I've had to be able to define every single word in this book. Like she's saying this like it doesn't sound completely insane. Okay, and then she's making claims about Hubbard's childhood. And this is, again, just more interesting regurgitation of what they get told in the church. But it's just kind of interesting stuff, right? Now, she brings up something I didn't know, and I'm very curious about this. I'm not sure where she got this information from. He says, was L. Ron Hubbard raised in any religion? And she says, yeah, Presbyterian. Huh. And she says, I don't know that his family was devout, but at least culturally they were Presbyterians. And he grew up in Helena, Montana, and Grandpa had a ranch. There's even pictures of him at 3 years old on this big horse. Not that anybody's holding on to him either. He's just on the horse. He's working, ranch life. Got a horse and worked, baby. She's saying this, right? And somewhere, not in here, somewhere he talks about getting thrown off a horse and somebody in his family giving him a spanking for mistreating the horse. You learn to sit on the horse, It's very different, in like 1915 in Montana, it was the frontier. Like just this romanticized version of Hubbard's childhood. Oh, he was 3 years old and bucking broncos and riding horses and working on the ranch. All of that from a picture of L. Ron Hubbard sitting on a horse at 3 years old. I mean, come on, But they don't even question it. They don't even think to question it. Oh, yeah, 3 years old. He was working on the ranch. Okay. Again, small point. All of these relatively small points, but collectively, they form a full world view. And it is a bubble world view. This kind of world view is only possible when you steep yourself in propaganda and indoctrination, right? And have to believe it because of your emotional needs. I love this. This was rich. Later on, he's talking about science fiction and Battlefield Earth and stuff like that. And he goes, do you recommend that I get Battlefield Earth from the library? And she goes, oh, yeah, it's science fiction. I love that book. And he says, but is it considered, this is a good question, but is it considered scripture in Scientology? And she says, not at all. It's science fiction. Now this is what she says. She says, now there are things in there that a Scientologist would read and laugh about. He certainly does not like mind control. Ron does not like mind control. And so in a couple places where that sort of rears its head, he's not nice about it. I love that book. I find it very inspiring. And about 3/4 of the way through, it just he gives us like a plot twist and you're like, oh, I'm not going to tell you. And then he also wrote a 10-volume series called Mission Earth. And now that is eye-opening. You would really need to be up on the condition of the world and stuff like that to see what it is he's poking so much fun at. He's pretty ruthless. I don't know if any of y'all are familiar with the 10-volume Mission Earth series or have bothered to read Battlefield Earth, but oh my God, it's bad. It's really, really bad stuff, right? Stuff only a Scientologist could love. And even then, the Mission Earth thing, it was a real slugfest getting through those books. The only reason I did it is because it was L. Ron Hubbard writing it. By about book 3, I was done. It was that bad. Even as a Scientologist, I'm saying. she loves it. She thinks it's great social satire because Hubbard makes all kinds of fun in the Mission Earth books about all the things he's made conspiracy theories about: international bankers, homosexuals, the LGBT agenda, how it's taking over the world and, dooming mankind to extinction, and how the big bankers and how the world conspiracy and mental health is being used to destroy our civilization. All of that is laid out in a fiction story in the Mission Earth series, and she gobbles it up and thinks it's awesome. But I just had to laugh. I laughed out loud the first time I saw this, where she's talking about how L. Ron Hubbard doesn't like mind control. I mean, Jesus. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, and if that's not an obvious joke to you, then just check out my channel, because it's all about how Scientology is nothing but pure mind control. All right, just check in here, see how we're doing. Oh, we're doing great. Okay, good. Yeah, wow, 2 hours in. Okay, so let's. We're getting close to finishing up here, guys. I figured it might go this long. Oh, this is really good. This is good stuff. Okay, so here because he brings up history of man. And if you've been watching my channel or you know about Scientology, then you know that one of L. Ron Hubbard's books, called Scientology, A History of Man, written in 1952, is one of the most amazing books that L. Ron Hubbard ever wrote. And it contains wall-to-wall detailed descriptions of incidents that supposedly happened to all of us, or most of us, in our spiritual history on this planet and earlier, but mostly contained to stuff on this planet, and how the evolution of species on this planet is part of our genetic memory, and how that can come up in auditing sessions. And so you could find yourself running incidents, engrams, of being a clam on a beach, stuck, with some sand in it or something, or a sloth, or even an amoeba, or cellular life. I mean, he took it all the way back. And he said these incidents are there, and they're there to be run, and they could cause current, this lifetime problems. He said the source of a toothache could be this clam thing, where you're stuck as this clam. And it's not that you're Thetan, that you as a Thetan were there. This is genetic memory. He makes these claims. I'm not kidding. This is all in the book. And so this is part of the Scientology lore. And it has to be taken seriously, and it has to be dealt with as factual. So check it out. She says, this is one of those wow moments, is she says, even I don't know if I believe some of the stuff in that book. I'm like, really? That's her saying that. I'm like, really? Yeah, she said that. So even Scientologists have a hard time accepting some of the really, really out there stuff. Yet, here's a woman who bought into Xenu hook, line, and sinker. And I don't mean to pick on Sally here as like an individual. This is, maybe I should have said this up front. This is representative of Scientology and Scientologists as a whole. That's what I loved about this, is what most Scientologists really think and how they think. That's why it's so insightful. I'm not just trying to pick on this one woman. So she talks about history of man. And he's like, okay, well, what's in it? And she says, well, a history of man is basically after Ron developed the e-meter and he would have people holding the cans and start running things and stuff. And you found certain incidents are common to everybody. Certain incidents in the past, certain types of incidents, like the whole thing about, the between lives area, one body dies and you get this electronic forgetter thing, and then you take a new body and you forget your previous life. That's in there, that kind of thing. So, but there are some of them that are just like, wow. And it says right in the front of these, this is not a statement of claims made. This is a research reference. This is what was coming up. This is what was coming up on e-meters from everybody. And again, there's some of that stuff. I read that and I go, I don't remember that. She's saying this, right? And some of them go, oh yeah, I remember that. So yeah, that's a wild one, History of Man. So you're welcome to read that one with a grain of salt or not. It's interesting. Another wow statement. Wow, did she really just say to read L. Ron Hubbard with a grain of salt? Where's your KSW, Sally? Man. It's a good thing Tony redacted all of this, by the way. She would be in a lot of trouble with the church for doing this and having it exposed on Tony's blog. A lot of trouble. Tony did her more of a favor than anybody else by redacting the names and locations of this. Because this could be any Scientologist anywhere, any town, you know? They're never going to be able to. I mean, they might figure out some stuff from some of what she said here, and they're probably working very hard to do so, by the way. So there is enough identifying information in here that Scientology might actually figure out who she is. But, you know, it's good that they're not, that at least Tony didn't make it easy for them. But getting into this types of incidents thing, I wanted to comment on this because the fact is, here's the fact of the matter with the History of Man book. And we've covered this before, but let me say this again here. Because she's lying. She has no idea what she's talking about. When she's talking about how these incidents were coming up over and over again and everybody's got them. That's not true. The History of Man book is based on research that was done with the brand new e-meter that Hubbard was given by Volney Matheson, the guy who actually invented it. Hubbard took that e-meter, he gave his son, L. Ron Hubbard Jr., Nibs, Quaaludes and uppers and other drugs. Right out of high school, this kid came to join L. Ron Hubbard and work for him and work with him, his dear old dad. And what does his dad do? Loads him up on drugs, lays him on a couch, puts some cans in his hand, and starts telling him what's on his, and says, what are you looking at? And sends him down the track, sends him down memory lane. And this is the stuff they came up with. And then Hubbard also did the same process with his wife, Mary Sue, his third and final wife, who he had just gotten hooked up with in 1951-52. And he did the same drill with her. And maybe he held the cans as well. But that's it. That was the research. 2 or 3 people. Not everybody. Not even remotely everybody. In fact, not anybody else came up with this crap. And that's the truth of the History of Man. So make of that what you will, but she makes of it that this is really powerful stuff. And maybe, you know, she gets cagey about it because it's so damn weird, and she knows it's weird. And she knows it doesn't go down easily with people who are not already steeped in the Scientology mythology, right? In other words, they're not ready for it. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, I just wanted to give you that little insight there. And let's see. Oh, yeah. Okay. And this is fun. If you ever wonder, what is it that's, you know, there's this independent Scientologists. These people out who leave Scientology officially, but then go and continue practicing Scientology. What do Scientologists think about those people? Do they even know about them? Sally does. And Carl is going on with her, and he says, there are still people. Yeah, she says, Carl says, I found this website that claims to have the books of L. Ron Hubbard available for free downloads. Is it okay to use that? It's not an official Scientology website. So he just asked her straight up. I love this guy. And Sally says, then I wouldn't. Oh, because God only knows what they've done to them. You can download on Scientology.org. Have you been there? Carl says, I've been there a little. And she goes, okay, they got a lot of videos, stuff to download. There's that. You know, there are still people who don't want Scientology to succeed. So I don't trust them. Carl says, they claim to be like some independent Scientology organization. And she says, that's a terrifying thought. I mean, L. Ron Hubbard set up the whole administrative organizational system. So if they're not willing to be part of that, then they're not really trying to do Scientology or Dianetics Ron style. Carl says, okay. And she says, I mean, I can't tell you don't, but I would really not recommend it because God only knows what you're going to end up with. Maybe you'll end up with a version, a pre-2007 version. By the way, check the date on your Science of Survival, right? Because that's the book that had the 10,000 semicolons in it. So, right? So that's the attitude about those indies, those independent Scientologists, those squirrels. Can't trust them. At least she didn't bust out the squirrel word. I'm a little surprised she didn't. But she definitely was discouraging, right? At least she had a sense enough to go, well, I can't tell you don't, but really don't trust those guys. I mean, you know, don't. Oh, God, yeah. And then she just regurgitates more nonsense from the events about Science of Survival. And, you know, of all the books that needed revamping in 2007, Science of Survival, it had been the most mangled, she says. Oh, if she only knew the original. Then she says there's the one and only televised interview with Ron. Now that's interesting. I bring that point up that she tells Carl, yeah, there's the one and only interview, which is the 1960s interview, I think 66 interview, that was given in South Africa with Tony Hitchman, who at the time was a journalist and then became a Scientologist. I actually met him many, many, many years later in Santa Barbara. So that interview is the famous Introduction to Scientology video that Scientology uses. They've colorized it and spoofed it up. But it's L. Ron Hubbard explaining Scientology and explaining basic principles of it and stuff. And that Scientologists think that's the only interview that L. Ron Hubbard ever gave that was televised. They don't know about the 1969 World of Scientology video, which is far more insightful. That's the video where Hubbard said he never had a second wife, amongst many other things. They actually brought camera crews onto the boats, showed the Sea Org members at that time in that place, and they look like shit. And shows them lining up on deck and shows all the weird stuff they were up to. And it's black and white, and you see L. Ron Hubbard, and you see, you know, his mangled teeth and various things. It's quite insightful. Can't recommend that enough if you can find it. I think it's called The Secret World of Scientology or something like that. It's on YouTube. You can find it. And this was interesting. I wanted to highlight this bit, and I think we're coming up near the end now. But there's an attitude here that I wanted to kind of show. She's been talking to Carl, praising him, talking about what a wonderful, insightful, aware, intelligent guy he is. And she says, and because you're picking up a lot, you have, I mean, obviously you're literate. As soon as you asked me the other day if people really remember their prenatals, then I knew you really were reading Dianetics. But then she has to drop this. Maybe 80% of it is going over your head. I don't know. But you're still way ahead of the average person. They can't help themselves. That authority, you know, superiority, egotism, it just comes out in the stupidest ways. And I don't know that Sally is even aware of it. You know, this sort of high-handed, oh, I don't know if you even understood 80% of it, maybe, you know, after she spends all this time praising and praising him. It's weird, isn't it? It's just weird, the duality of it. Okay, this was funny on the... sorry, excuse me. They go into the Sunday services. They talk about the Sunday services a little bit. And I just had to laugh a little bit at the way she downplays it. Because if you saw, I think I did a Q&A or something recently where I actually talked in some detail about the group processing. And I read some of the commands and stuff of it and what goes on in the Sunday services and the sermons and all that crap. Scientologists don't like that. They don't. They don't really think about it as a religion. They don't worship. They don't go to church. They go to the org for their auditing and their courses. It's not a religious activity for them. And Sunday service is weird for them. They really don't quite get why it's happening, except that it's an image thing, that it's sort of a PR thing. Churches are supposed to have Sunday services, so we'll have a Sunday service, right? And here's what she says. This is another one of those oh wow statements, right? She says, yeah, there's a Sunday service. I mean, in all honesty, the Sunday service is like, we're not a church built on Sunday services. We have Sunday services, but the action mostly takes place in the classroom or the auditing room. I mean, they don't even take it seriously, you know? The Sunday service is more of a community thing. There's usually the minister will read an essay or something from Hubbard, you know? There's no choir, there's no kneeling, you know? She's just not into it, obviously. Anyway, then she says, then out of nowhere, she's comparing it with other religions, and she's talking about how it's fun to be in a new religion because we like to have a birthday party. And she says, Christmas is great, but it's not a birthday party. And then she drops this weird, Christians don't generally have a birthday cake. What? Where does that idea come from? She says, some do actually, but mostly not. I've never heard of that before. Since when is it an anti-Christian practice to have a birthday cake? I don't even know where that came from, but it was just another one of these things she tosses off as though it's a total fact. Oh, yeah, it's just how it is. No, it's not. Oh, and then she goes into Narconon. Okay, so, you wonder, do they know about Narconon and Criminon and Applied Scholastics and all of their front groups? Oh, you bet they do. They hear about them at the events that Scientology used to have very regularly. Now, not so much, right? But they're getting back into the groove on that, maybe. But Carl says, yeah, I've heard them advertising on the radio. And she says, really? Oh, wow. Yeah, it has the highest success rate of any of the drug rehab programs. Narconon has a 70% success rate, which is like way above everybody else. No, they don't. And no, it's not. They don't have anything like that. Narconon's success rates are death. People have died doing the Narconon program. And they've been, sued or investigated or almost investigated right out of existence in Oregon and other states in the nation. And right now, Narconon is like toxic. Nobody wants to have anything to do with Narconon. And all the Narconon centers have had to rebrand and rename themselves, and they're not talking about it as a Narconon facility anymore. They come up with New Life Center and whatever these new just New Awakenings. Come to the New Awakenings drug rehab program. Well, what method are you using? L. Ron Hubbard's. Stay away from that. Like the plague. But she's still regurgitating shit from 10, 20 years ago as though it's still true. It's not. And I doubt she actually even has a clue about the current state of Narconon. Interesting, And she gives some success story about some, well-to-do woman who got up to OT7 who did the Narconon program. So, and we have reached the end of the transcript. Wow, huh? That was something else. All right, so let's see here. Let me just take a quick look here through some of the comments that have been coming in the last few. That's a weird one. Okay, who doesn't love squirrels? They're cute. That's right. Yeah, Carl did know a little bit. I like this one here. Where is that? Yeah, here it is. Carl knows a little too much. Yes, he does. Yes, he does. I thought that was a great, great thing he did. Um, yeah. All right. So good, guys. All right. So that is basically all the things I wanted to talk to you about today in going through this transcript and the various things I highlighted. I really hope you found this information educational, informative, and, you know, hopefully a little entertaining as I was going along here with all of this monologuing. I very, very much appreciate your viewership and support. Thank you very much for coming around and watching here. I will put a quick plug in. I am available for consultation. If you need consulting on a one-on-one, I'm not talking about therapy. I am not a therapeutic psychologist, but I do know more than a little bit about the subject of coercive control. Went and got a degree in it and all that. So I am happy to consult with you if you are either an ex-cult member or somebody's coming out of a coercive, controlling environment or situation and you want some help. What do you do? How do you deal? What should you read? What should you know? I can help you with that. Or if you have a friend or family member who is currently stuck in a cult situation and you don't know what to do, or you want some advice or direction on how to proceed, I can help with that too. All right. So that all being said, let's go ahead and wrap up the show. And okay, got that. And all right. This has been fun. Bye-bye, guys.